Good morning, good afternoon, hello teacher and classmate. Today I get to read the chapter 8 by the All the Elvis Are the Hidden. I start read it, and today the chapter 8 the name was Why Everyone Loved Modis. In September 2 million Don Braster asleep and 116-year-old business information company spun off a sleepy Sunday. The subsidiary was Modi that the credit agency, which Don Brasted had owned since 1972 and which has just hit a century mark himself, along with two competitors, Standard and Pirate, of which writing Modi's was a business got impossibility. That a blue ball there be repaid a fool. It didn't so by using a series of letter grades. Now has rating its highest invested rate, rating AAA. Meet to the blow had Smith reached the fall attrition bound. Almost no bonds rate AA to triple B. Minus were also investors rate askier at triple S, but still down for Windows or Orphites. Anything below a triple B minus was wrong, both considered to risk to be bought by prevention funds and other institutional investors that were legally bound to hold only safe investments. The business of writing was studied as a thing called B. Everyone used to the three rating agencies and everyone understood what those letter grades computed. Modi boasted that already 30 trillion of the world rebounds across 100 countries already. However, Modi's 1999 renounce of 564 million one half belong detains the future 2 million, much less the future 500 when its stock began trading. Most investors, Janet, one number four, who always liked to buy stocks other overlooks, took a 15% takes in Moody's, but that was released because he liked the company's incredible market position and its steady cash flow. Has Evans Wall for Moody's was surprised to start growing faster through late addiction to corporate and government bonds. Moody had a registered financial products Wall Street catching emphasis for mortgage-backing securities of balance sheet bicycles, derivatives, and the likes. S&P was the day when first approached by Leo Rainey in 1980s. That recluse was long gone. By the time Moody's became a standalone company, its structured finance business was growing much faster than its traditional bond rating business. Structured financial products need more than just a rate, though they need a high rating. The whole purpose of asset-backed security was to take assets that could never merit a AAA rating on there and was transform them in products. Safe sounds, AAA securities call about investors, like money market funds and pension funds. They call uses thanks to capital requirements, the combination of trading, which is cascading, leads to risk. The user risking stretches in the capital structure to protect the higher rating. The rating agencies had always been staying about, but so in AAA stages on corporate debate in 97 for in testes, only 6 companies had a AAA rating. Yet when it came to rates of mortgage-backed securities, the rating agencies counted all triple has like candy, literally tens of thousands of mortgage-backed treaties were rated AAA. In the early years, the securities performing well, that was a true event of their relative small beach at asset-backed securities that use supreme mortgage. They had plenty of credit ensembles, and besides housing prices are going up the always they supposed to which defaults to a minimum to the rating agencies continue to sleep triple has. When it did burst the rating agencies and the investor who had depended on them were counting floated, there were many reasons why the rating agencies continued to run triple as long after they should have stopped an erosion of standards, a weak suspension of capacities, a hunger, big fees, and market share, and inability to stand up to Wall Street. No less Moody's and the other rating agencies turned their backs on their own integrity. The history of the crisis, says former Moody's executive, is how Moody's put its profits ahead of what's right after an internal meeting held in the fall of 2007 in the financial crisis was granting a Moody's employee complaint that he would like more candor about the company's errors. As he called them, they make use even incompetent as credit analysts or the we sold to the devil for revenue a little bit of both in it. John Moody, the founder of Moody's, was Market journalist who in 1,900,000 published something called Woody's Manual of Industrial and Mission Securities, the publication which investors to immediately formed the originals of Moody at first of offered statistical information about stocks. Then Moody's began adding analysts ranking stock which later grades. Finally, he shifted his focus from stocks to bonds. This was his eureka moment. There has always been far information available about bonds that stocks. Bonds don't travel public exchange, and most of the information about them is held by the investment bankers and traders who are training to sell them. Modi saw his manual as a means of leaving the playing field. As the circulation of the publication grew, others compared him Henry Bagram Poor, who edited the American Rollout Journal, engages his son to begin rating bonds in 1922 after a merger with Standard Statistics in 1941. The company became known as Standard and Poor's. The credit rated business didn't change much until the 1970s, when two things happened. First, the rating agencies, which by them included a small explosion, Fitch Unit, opened the way the general revenue about this business. Bond writing had become important enough that many investors would buy and understand bond subscriptions were always going to be optional for the subscribers. Bond rating had become mandatory for insurers. The rating agency's new business model came with obvious conflict. Now that they were being upon by fund insurers, the rating agencies were potentially belonging to the same people whose bonds they were rating for a long time. The potential conflict had kept Moody's and S&P from taking that step in 1957. For instance, a version's Moody's executive told the Christmas Science Monitor, "We obviously can ask payment for rating abroad. To do so would have a price to process. We could not escape charges. We told understandably came that ratings are for sale. No Moody's was insisted it could manage discount. As well, International has many of these rules where they overlooked two problems. The first is that blood marker was unnecessarily outsubscribed in risk magnet to the rating agencies. The universal attempt to retain resulted in almost not intervening research by the fund managers, who actually began the bonds. They simply assumed that a fund rating agency had given double or A or a triple A. It must be safe. Nor was there some dark secret as the office controller of the currency, but in 1997 ratings are important because investors generally accepted ratings in lieu conducted a due diligence investigation of the understanding assets. Second, the rules involving the rating agencies with almost Bill-Blackan authority to borrow the phrase first used in 1978 by New York City's Finance Administration Rob Goodman, but that authority was remaining reserved. The agencies has came and studies know that the ratings were accrued a very high percent of the time, but anyone who dug more doubly could find many instances when they got wrong. Usually, when something unspecial happened, the rating agencies had missed the action, and the Russian milkballs. They failed to catch Print Central in the 1970s and long-term capital management in the 1990s. They often the Roman companies just day before bankruptcy too late to help investors. Nor was anything new. One study showed that 78% of the municipal bonds rated double A or triple A in 1929 default during Great Depression. The critical life-threatening fact the ratings carried forces low expansive troubled products even has proved piled up that the agencies made mistake after mistake, their power continued to grow. The respect the suspect it not was rating agencies will eventually be corrupted by their business model that it took so long to happen. Their many years weather base made the results. The modest culture interbound and nerdy. Any more asking academia in that was than Wall Street analytics will answer they found after many rise. If at all Moody's analysts were standoffish toward the insurers who paid their salaries a little like journalists during the heyday of newspaper. When they called home their nose at investor credit analysts at Moody, didn't worry about the revenue that might be lost if they problem. In the early 1990s, Moody's actually refused to rate the popular structured products on the grounds that a rating might lead investors to expect more than they were likely to get. The last anecdote was recorded in 1994 article in Treasurer and Risk Management magazine enlightening Why Everyone Hates Woody. After polling 99 corporate treasurer, the magazine concluded that ingrained in Moody's corporate culture is a conviction that close to relationship but we but Moody's was actually proud of the characterization. A company executive responded by saying that the survey let out, or most important consequence, investor. What caused Moody's to change were three things. The first was the inexorable rise of the structured financing and the concomitant rise of Moody's structured products business. The second was the 2 million spin-off which resulted in many Moody's executive stock opinion was, and the final factor was the promotion of the forever Lewin naming Brian Clarkson within structured financing, a Detroit native who had graduated from Ferris State University in Michigan and then practiced law at a New York firm. Clarkson joined Moody's as an executive in 1991 without ever having worked as a credit analyst. One of these early tasks was to rate mortgage-backed securities incited by Guardian, the surprise mortgage organization founded the Jenkins in California. The boats, needless to say, eventually blew up, but there was a lesson in that. It was a Clarkson and his bossed by 1995. He had become to go ahead and Hastreet Bacon financing rope. Clarkson went off like a bomb inside Woody's. He deployed a reputation for a being nasty to those who could fight back and forever forgetting a slight. At my level, any waterlogged discussion of his management style included the words fear and intimidation. A former Woody's labor rich mechanist later told a Senate permanent subcommittee on investigations, Mark Frobea, another ex-Woody's lawyer, the character of some who called the unfortunate things with his and they exploited his can to advance their agenda. That agenda was using structured financing to boost venture market share and blow out Woody's stock price. Clarkson had no problem with this agenda. Where in the service business, he once told the Wall Street Journal, I don't applaud it for that. But what exactly didn't that mean for a company that rates bonds? It was just a case of answering the phones on the First Reich under Clarkson. Founder analysts say it's so making caring about whether the insurers, meaning the small, rob on the investments banks who measured we happen with the rights very good. Clarkson, head of the Streetbank Group, was longtime Moody's analyst Mark Adelson. Adelson was in some ways the opposite of employment in structured financial seemingly forever has a young Lauren in the 1980s. Adelson had worked on several of the early deals put together by the Lou Raymond and Larry Fink firms. Because of the long experience, he was always less willing to accept uncritical many of the arguments made for mortgage-backed securities. When underwriters began reducing the credit exchange, claiming that the securities has proved themselves with their good performance, Adelson didn't buy it. The fact that said class like Gonson had performed well in the past say nothing about now, about how the same asset class was going to perform in the future. He believed for a very long time Moody's backed Adelson, for which he will always be new Moody's. My view wasn't almost immediately one Moody's. He said you spend a lot of time doing soul searching when you're looking in everyone else is looking the other way. As Clarkson was rapidly promoted, Anderson was eventually moved out of breaking securities. In 2001, he quit. There had long tension between the corporate bond side Moody's and the structured finance the side. Clarkson assumed singly that the structured finance had won. More than more than that, the culture of the structured finance side had the won. Bond analysts even in the walls of the regulatory facing pressure to ensure favorable ratings, but Modi had backing when they resisted not anyone. Soon after Clarkson took chairs, Moody's began making point information its analytic of the company. Market share in various structured products according to a leisure find in 1910. In 2010, Moody's by the state of contention, its Moody's missed out on a deal the credit analytic employment will be asked to explain why. Please advise the reason for rating discrepancies by your competitors read on email. Michalek, who had the reputation as a slick, said that Goldman Sachs once requested that he not be assigned to Goldman. Later testified that he was told that not company which in risks would result in a phone call to one of the superiors. When I started there, I don't think Moody's managers knew what their market share was. Says one former employee by the Bank Supreme, there were regular emails every time Moody's didn't get ideal. Another former Magana director says to Clarkson, used to tell people we're in the business and we have to pay attention to market share. If you ignore market share, he'll fire you. When I joined in Moody's in late 1997, Mark Freva told investigators and analysts worst fear was not well contributed to a segment of rating that was wrong damage Woody's reputation for getting answer right and lost his job as a result. When I left Moody's, an analytic worst fear was that he would do something that would allow him to single out for President Moody's market share for imagination. Moody's rebounded a damaged Moody's relationship with his clients and lost his job. It resulted in prepared testimony for a financial crisis inquiry commission. Clarkson denied that Moody's sacrificed ratings quality in the effort to grow Merck's share. Example, in August 1997, after commercial mortgage, Alert noted that Moody's shared a commercial mortgage-backed securities just 14%, largely because it was being found in certain areas than ESP or Fitch. Clarkson responded by saying it the time to take a second look. Moody's market share soon rose to 22%. In 2 million, Moody's had 25% in the mortgage-backed securities market, according to Asset Backing Alert. By the first act of 2001, it had jumped to 59%. EVILS claiming Moody's had lowered in standards, but Clarkson attributed Moody's rise of the clone of its analytic several former, where fired Clarkson said that complaints by the rivals that Moody had lowered its standards were so surprised. Another example Moody's was entirely more conservative on securitization in case where in addition to the first being then was a second line mortgage, but that was a problem because ESP had a different losser standard. It concluded in 2,000,001 that as a loan second lines loans were attached to no more than 20% of the mortgage in the pool. It would rate in the interior pool has it didn't have additional risks. Another agencies take the same position shortly. The fireman Richard Bryant, subprime leaders told the Financial Crisis Inquiry Commission. He added the tracking agencies effectively when viewed to subprime previous mortgage. Those were subprime mortgage in which the overablowned putting in the up any cash and got two loans, one of the mortgage itself and another for the down payment. The great advance insurer had in staking AAA ratings is that they really needed altering agencies to be enabling. In any one ideal investors like heavily to agencies rate at ideal but not ranking about having all three employed. The insurers could play the agencies of the each another. They didn't really which rating agencies bestowing the rating. At the maturity was the rating itself. The AAA was the brand, not Woody's, says former Woody's structured financing Megan's director. Like everyone else utilizing risk models, the rating agencies uses the mathematics of probability theory to arrive at their ratings. A given mortgage has very investors on diversification spending risks. So one question was how different were the mortgages. If they all came from California, they were less differences than if some were from California, some from Ohio, and the front to Connecticut. The working assumption was home prices in California they will remain stable and even keep rising in other parts of the country. The Wall Street term for spreading risk this wall and they are more complex variants. Its correlation is essential and we described in numeral terms. They likelihood a trend on securities default, other walls default in them. Zero correlations means to the closer mortgage banking securities came to zero correlation and grading the percentage of tranches that could be bladed AAA. Underwriters often about credit enhancement to both the percent of AAA tranches. One obvious lane of this approach is that nowhere in the process was anyone requirement to conduct real world due diligence about the underwriter's mortgage, has the SEC later noted. There is no requirement that a rating agency verifies the information contained in RMBS. Loan profiles precedent to amongst RMBS standards of residence mortgage breaking securities. A second problem is that training agency models were built of the series assumption. One assumption was not abusing prices declining, that the claims would not be served. Another was that the housing market in California was uncorrelated with the housing market in Connecticut. And then there was fact unsupports For instance, USBS Barker Robert Morley, upon hearing that ESP might be revision its RMBS rating, sends an email to an ESP analyst. Heard your rating could be 5 notches by Moody's equivalent. He wrote, "Gonna kill your recipes." My first used to do modified only internally rating agencies had them for this rating shopper even clustering around that took place. There is a lot tricking. There's a lot tricking shopping was that goes on. He told the Wall Street Journal. Of course, he said nothing wrong with it. People shop deals all the times. He struggled. Revenge shopping is classic example why Alan Greenspan's theory of market discipline didn't work in the real world. The market competition between the rating agencies, which Greenspan assumed would make companies better, actually made them worse. The only way to get market share was to be answered, says Jordan Phones, a long-time Moody's magazine director. Was a race to a button. A former structured finance circuit executive at Moody's says no rating agency should say we're going to change, be conservative. You won't be business for long if you didn't what we all understood that. It turns regulate quality at surprises few things. Moody's chief executive Raymond McDaniel told his board in 2007. Ideally, competition will be primarily of business of ratings quality with the second concept of price and three component of service. Universally is the three competitive factors. Ratings quality is growing the last powerful, he added. In some sectors, it actually precisely quality by awarding ratings measurements based on the lowest credits and need for the highest ranking. Just as LTCM exposed the dangers of derivatives in 1998, where also came an early moment when the files all rating agencies were exposed for the all to see. The moment was December 2001. They earned filed for vintage, although earned had been faking or opposite portion of their profits for years. And though it was in a presumption decline since October, when the honesty is founded practices were first revealed, the rating agencies didn't downgrade the company's debut until days before its collapse. Investors involved in our stocks is now its bond lost millions in another banking quality, followed by similar declarations at WorldCom, Tico, and headful of the other companies became a huge ongoing news story. A new far rating agencies had to lie to shine out. Any them was a big part of the narrative. Government investors put together risk reports about that the feelings the agencies driving agencies were extortionated. The congressional hearing Senator Joseph Lane said there were the simile that the convention of Enor at the high end. The ESP analyst who had converted Entron confessed that he had even read some of the company financial feelings. There was a strong sense that something was going to be done to reform the tracking agencies. Pre-First Washington and Fed regulation Moody's agreed to adopt a code of conduct. Among other things, the code stated that the determination of a credit ratings will be influenced only by factors relevant to a credit assignment. It so stated that the credit rating Moody's assignment will not be affected by the expensive or the potential for business relationship between Moody's and insured potential. In its launch, the state Connecticut, along with the shortly after Moody's, University its code of conduct to experienced compliance officer when fired and replaced by employees from the structured financing department. The head of the department later complained my wins was routinely ignored that the agency making less money. Investigators also alleged that during a dinner party after the board meeting, the president of the Moody's walked by the hall of compliance and said quite loudly how much remote did complacency brought in this year. The another word something changes, not single analytic, the United Bodies or ESP lost his job as a result to missing an trading movement, staying the same Woody's stock price after the trouble began rising. Again, the rating remained embedded in the all rules and regulation, and the conflict rating business model didn't change and outgrow the small consequence of bad reputation, say one former analyst. The trading secret was not nobody really wanted to refund the rating agencies. Investment bankers need to able continue willing. Cajoling and Broaden, the agency said no AAA rating investor wanted to really ration instead of having to their own research. Regulation found that in devising rules about risk taking, using rating was the assistant part. Most the big investors they like ratings to escapenas say generate funds. They say, "Oh, we do an analytic," but then when things go bad, well, it's fault of the credit rating agencies or was Clarkson later rating to other Moody's executive during an internal meeting in the fall of 97. It 2,000,007. In the perfect to be able to blame use for everyone. By blanking, you don't have the blame anybody else. Of the all securities who exited depended on their ability to get AAA rating more became more perceptive or more damaged than collateralized the bank's obligation or CDOs which the first invented in late 1918s but didn't become very popular until in 2000 were a key breaking securities on asteroids a collection in just about anything that generates whaling, bank write-ons, Jones bonds emergence. The higher the whale, the better just with a typical mortgage breaking security. The rating agencies will run the CDOs. At their wall, also the triple B or the triple B minus slice, which was called Massine portion, has well on rate quietly trencher, which to pay only after everyone else had collected their returns. One astronomical fact is that the CDO's managers didn't always have to disclose the securities, even they will buy CDOs buying, so why were they willing to do so? Because they were a view they weren't so much buying securities, they were buying a AAA rating. That was why the AAA was so likely. Like so many of the other financial products produced unto the cents, CDOs were necessary. A had idea done correctly, they could give investors broad support to different kinds to fixed income ascent at whenever CDOs fears mixed risks and conflicts. Wall Street didn't really care which explanation was correct, all it cared about that's what has discovered an anomaly called that take advantage films both mortgage banking tones the CDOs into the new resembled. The original bonds didn't have a have to be AAA, they could lower rating securities that once resembled into a new CDOs. Gold went up with as much as 70% in the ranges reading to AAA. Ratings available Wall Street calling this practice a more accurate than would have been ratings loaded. Some CDO managers were buying the allowing investors raining riches and CDOs. Once this started to happen, CDOs became a sell party, matching like cells that won't stop giving from the very beginnings. The mortgage banking securities business markers had always had to work hard enough investors to buy the lower rating treasures. The AAA as a triple B and B minus franchises were harder sell with much smaller universe of potential investors, but once the CDOs mentioned in sell became the buyer of the triple Bs. There were certainly limits how the business could get CDOs could absorb an infinite only triple B, retaining bonds and replace them into AAA securities, which everyone called the buoy bank's prevention bonds. In the time, CDOs became by the far the biggest institution of triple tranches of the mortgage basket securities, purchasing and resembling and anatomizing in 80 times. Very smart structured credit samples. Among their other consequences, their practice helps to prevent the world's most dangerous securities because they were the ones that had the highest high relative to their rating. On Wall Street, executive will later like CDOs pouring orally until you get to stuff that the most toxic. Like Gibson, a foreign merely lineage CDO research analyst, wrote a novel after the increases in which a character describes the CDO's market has a function stream. You can see point has a triple B's where analyzing recycled CDOs began CDOs squares. The release strains helped push sales of CDOs from 79 billion in 2 million to around 500 billion in the 2006. It was a circle of madness. The rating agencies, their entering efficient would have collapsed without their participation. Get the rating out the door. Was it saying for an executive? Nobody enter black analytic it was returning into a CDO. We simply assumed the AAA was a AAA says from Woody's magazine director who worked on CDOs. The analytic in structured finance were working relates are there. They were overland were growing so fast one keep step and we grossly understand requests from Moody's structured finance executive. Moody's top brass he says don't the mania could be with prices flattening out her result. They were so sting he says about Moody's and ESP former employees side there was no from him people with in a credit ring to research business school where they are for gain with the great sleep cost down and Of course, nobody had time inclination to examine the singular. I it could meet Putin in the assembly profiles business. Why didn't we investor that a credit wall? Simon after began lost much price on your racing after almost economic event and a critical and business inevitably flourished. After Lobby's Moody's, Mark Anderson joined National Securities, where he was the head of structured financial research. At securitization conference, he would look around the audience and think to himself, no one in road ever loading or collected by the red cent. Any stock can let it out the trick getting in a bag. In the fall in 2007, after starting meeting Moody's magazine director wrote a memo. My recommendation is that we do not rate ABS asset backing securities CDOs. The Asama began this recommendation is that due the compatibility of the product and multiple layers of risk, it never possible to have the riskiest amount of information to rate, but that had been true long before 2007. By the fall of 2005, Moody's market capitalization had grown to more than 15 billion. That's grown the same bears strings, yet bears strings had 100 million plummeted. No, 11 employees at 7 billions of revenue, while Moody's had 2,500,000 considered over 50%, making it one most profitable mobile or Microsoft between the time it shares supposed into a public company in February in 2007. His stock is had risen in 314%. Structured financing was approaching in 50% of Moody's revenue, up from 28% in 1998. In accounted for pretty much all of what he want. And in the August 2007, Brian Clarkson was named president of Moody's. His compensation that year was 3.2 million. Well, this is the chapter 8. Well, today continue to the chapter 9. A little big box and the icon online. It was in 2002 holiday season and the college students, let's call him Bob, was home at Sacramento. In Sacramento, one night out on town, he met another young man, Slick Daddy G. Bob nicknamed him Slick Daddy G, who was 26, was a larger life personality type. Bob recalls. He had perfectly highly Bob Hyder shot and gleaming perfect with 10. Perfect bronze skin. He also had his own liver driver and sleeping supply of the money. Both joined Lily G for the nightclub hopping, pick up pretty girls and drink Dom Perignon. The crew painted house apartment in just called the P, and where an insane party was taking place, a DJ and more girls, buses and drugs than you can imagine. Say Bob, it was one crazy experience of my life. His point. The next morning, Bob saying, "What tell you?" The second subprime bubble was a wheel. Anything was seen in American business during subprime. 2 kids just out of school, something high school, became loan officers. Some of the plumbing down, 30 million or 14 million a month. Sadly, G told Bob a especially good month he took home 125 million. in some place and Archimedes Sacramento offices, where Bob had taken a job in 2,000,005. Drug users was happened secret from the loan offices side specialty cooked and met, so that the loan officers called for some 14 hours a day. And the money pouring in it was just America's enter in 2,000,006 at a Washington Mutual retreat for top performance in Maui. Employment's performance Arab skid calling. I like it beatbox to the turn babies got back. The crew rapped. I like big hugs and I cannot lie. You mortgage brother can Danny that way done rolls in like your print your own cash and you got make a plash. You just spends like a never ends. Cause you got that a big new bands? What triggered Supreme to business besides some very short memories was Alan Greenspan's decision to push interest rates down in the historic lows during in the first few years of a new century keep the economy from falling. He was reacting to the bursting in the internet bubble. Low interest rates drove down mortgage rates, making home purchase more attractive while driving up investors. The manager for jail, and despite their repents continue to smile on the Supreme Freedom because it is supposed benefit in helping more Americans buy homes. Naturally, Johnston bells his view, where once more margin application would simply have been denigrated. Lenders are now able to quit efficiently due to the risk posed by individual application and the price that risk according he reached in April 2,000,005. But there was another factor as well. Piece by piece, over the course of the nearly 2 decades, and gigant money machine had been enabled that depended on subprime mortgage its raw material. Wall Street needed subprime mortgage that it could payers and securities bonds, and investors around the world wanted Wall Street mortgage products because they offers high yields and low yield environment. Merrill Lynch, Morgan Stanley, UBS, the Insurance Bank, even Goldman Sachs, which had stayed away from subprime 2003, moving heavily into the business by 2,000,005. The securities industry derived 5.16 billion in the revenue from the underwriting because vacant by mortgage and related assets. Fox Pitt, Kelton analyst David Tron told Bloomberg that a current static 25% of a bond underwrite revenue. Mortgage organizations saw that supply the risk mortgage Wall Street craving no matter that a fraud that took place during subprime when planning in comparison to what happened during subprime 2. Even brothers who qualify for a traditional mortgage meeting be pushed a high free, high interest rate subprime products and Northalition mortgage meeting to that's more lucrative for lenders than the toll 20 years fixed rate mortgage. Here's prime brokers became a whole new category all mortgage there we calling. Nor did everything prime borrowed need to be pushed a bit as subprime to move it into bubble territory, and more and more people wanted so-called affordable products lots with low tester rates that could quickly result a few higher rate, for instance, or even negative atomic loads which a product pay less investors do, so that principal got bigger. The actually purchased a new home was only part for that rose. His new bubble, as Rosner's had begun respect millions of Americans were using subprime mortgage to profit from the rise in the value of homes they already owned. A big American business, for instance, was something called cash outright, meaning that borrowers refinancing. By February 2004, fully two-thirds for loans made by New Century, another huge subprime lender, were cash out ratings from 2 million to 2 million more than health subprime organizations, and more than one-third of all ad loans were used as refinancing, according to Jason Thomas, a former economist at the National Economy Council, who is now at the George Washington University Finances Department. According to Wall Street Journal, total household debt in American doubled from 7 trillion to 14 trillion between 2 million and 2 million 7. Debt related to housing was responsible for 18% of the increments, and of course using practice solvents were going through the roof, which being able exacerbate everything else since in 1914, according to data completed by the ESP Case-Shiller Home Price Index. The average home increased in value by 0.7% in a year, but between 2 million and 2 million framing to the 20 largest metropolitan areas in the country saw home values rise by more than 10% a year. Median home prices in hot areas like Phoenix and Las Vegas increased, and inflation adjusted an 18%. The ratio at home price to income, which had hovered between 2 and 4 since the Great Depression, shot up at places to has 201 to 12, according to a data collected by financial blogger Paul Kradowski. During subprime wine, the new subprime companies had been marginal players in an enormous housing industry. In subprime 2, the subprime companies dominate the industry. Washington Mutual turned itself into the of biggest subprime. New Century and Option One beat players during subprime, and one became multi-billion-dollar company. And there was Ameriquist. In April in 1996, Roland Neyman moved out of the house he shared with who gave a 27 years Miriam Sally Amal. During the Vice the Boys proceedings, he told her that because things were not going well with his business, her financial future would be uncertain unless they slated. Quickly, she slated again in the court in Flinding. Please, do not consider his any kind of creed, Hamal later told his in letter. In the divorce, which was finalized in April 1998, she got 11 million tax-free, and their homes in Los Angeles and Palm Springs. Armal also paid the legal fees. He in turn got full control of his brand new company, Ameriquist Capital Corporation, or ACC. As it turns out, Amal's financial future was spectacular. In the spring of the 1997, before the divorce was concluded, Amal had spun off a division in Long Beach in an initial public offering. Amal's name was mentioned only once on the offering documents as owner of 69.9% in the parent company. His company sold all of the shares to outside investors, reaping a little over in 120 million in the produce. A few years later, the new publicity in Long Beach was sold Washington Mutual, marking the drift's entry subprime by the only Amal was already in the process of creating a new subprime empire. Under the umbrella of ACC, his most promising and new venture was Ameriquist. ACC became a loan company for more than a dozen entities, including Ameriquist and Town on the Country, to retain subprime lenders with wholesale force and Argent, which sold loans from independent brokers according to the American banker from 2 million won to Putin ACC, a drop at the least subprime lenders that year, according to figures published by Los Angeles Times. Between 2,000,002 and 2,000,004, ACC generated 7.6 billion in revenue and earning 2.7 billion in profits. Ameriquist itself made more than 18 billion in loans in 2004, its peak year. In some ways, Harvard followed a playbook. He made fair price land to the people, eventually be trouble paying the bank, and he sold loans to Wall Street, but he didn't in a much bigger scale than Long Beach. Buster than massive advertising campaign, Ameriquist pays another round 3 million supports the Rolling Stones. A bigger bank tour in 2005. I spent another returns commercial blimps and sponsorship of everything from NASCAR to the popular PBS, Proven Antiquist Random. The company Shokan was what else? The pronoun sponsor of the American Dream. Executives were extremely well paid with Lee, who had worked to a small 1990s, spent 1 as year at Ameriquist CEO before quickly the sprints of 2005. He later said the presentation that in 2004 and 2005 he had received early houses around 5 million on the top ugly 313 in salary million. His derivative agreement was strongly in return for working a maximum of 25 hours, 3 months, and every the higher compete not disappear ACC. The company agreed to pay him 5 million. Has loan officers they got small base salary but may lose their money or commission. Typical 50% are big when they generate and perks were fabulous. Every day was Archimedes hosters and even called the Big Spin in Las Vegas. For hundreds of top producers in 2004, Bills was MSS and the rock band 3 Ever Blind played in 2005. The hit national sales Mary Shelton was out in Canon at festivals in the Black Eyed Peas played. One low author Joey McGregor just his collage in Homer that year. When some asked him was exited, he replied, "Well, yeah, I've already got one." The company also dubbed 300 launch officer and all expenses paid to Hawaii in 2005. The amount of money company had to roam around to stringing was from corporate employment disguising sales to were 20 years old and maybe had couple years of college work, making incredible money and driving Porsches. It feels so like what's wrong. When they practiced the young loan officers at Ameriquist, he's under enormous pressure to new moves, a chop shop, and which I was always begin cracking for more. Say Mark Bromchill described the Ameriquist office in Minnesota, where he worked from 2002 to 2003. Two other firms, loan officers interviewed separately used the same description. Think regular Glenn Ross, loan officers were often required to make the century number outbound calls each day, 150 save-ups, and there were power-ups, the cold callings. Managers were employing the fears to anyone. Fraud was an everyday occurrence. You don't look over, there will be a guy already, double 2S, says Munchin, and loans officer Lisa Taylor, who worked in Ameriquis Sacramento office from 2,000,001 to 2,000,003, filed the sexual harms and grounded the seminal case alleging that Ameriquis management condoned and encouraged and participated in extensive document alteration, manipulation, and the forgetting the ordinary more loans. Taylor later told the Los Angeles Times that she recalled in the crawlers using a bracelet Coca-Cola, branding machine in attracting words on loan agents called copy brokers a signature on two documents. She also said company Archimedes quits. In 2003, Ameriquis tried the tightening up its lending standards. Among other things, it changed its compression guidelines is so that loans officers were no longer rewarded for taking on additional fees, and it implemented that software designing the problem found. But the relentless pressure for loan volume, Ameriquis' core product was something called in 2 by 228 loan maiden in had low fixed rate for 2 years, and they converted a high adjustable rate for the remaining 20 years ago, what made in 2 to 28 loan particularly premiums that made that the borrower either had to finance at year 2 and pay a free, or pay the higher rate for a year before refinancing without having to pay a penalty. Then there were the points and fee accruals charged. In theory, brokers pay up from points to reduce the interest rate on their loan, and in theory, risk-based pricing or charging consumers based in the risk they represent means making brokers should pay more. I needed that they a similar justification for subprime lendings. It would be hard to call what went on at a criminal risk-based participant Ameriquis had ruled company. The points and fees on any one loans at 5.5%, but according to former loan officer, the goal in the branch was to charge at close limits as possible. The credits of the broker's material allowed whatever officer Trump could get away with. A spreadsheet of a loan alchemist made in the month of February 2,005 after a bid illustration on customer with mid-grade credit score got a lot of 715 million and pay maximum points and free, and review Ameriquis has 41 226 million. Another customer with 615 million loan paid so little in fees and points that the generation only 1,080,033 for the Ameriquis, yet a second customer was less accredited working than the first. Another example from the same speed hits, two brokers with Acribium. Ameriquis' total revenue for just 1 month was 87.5 million and on 2.5 billion in loans. Ameriquis also had special portfolio origination remakes whose job is they will pay for a big credit advance to get alerts whenever an Ameriquis That was standard practice in the industry according to former loans officer, but they also time didn't something for sembled Bob's say that century Ameriquist employments wall back into the system and print out with everything about Brower. The loan officer was the Carl Browers who had even voiced an interesting refinancial offering a new land with reduced interest rate. A habit a few new views for alchemists. The reality was you were screaming people again and again. Boys say ACC says that it was against company politics to measure company assent including customer information and points out that every employee receiving a signed document accounted it is. And what happened when complaints about to those prices laid out public view? Once again, Armor Field Bank who this playbook he spent a corn painting 20 Ameriquist officer accusing it the pension late tactics. In 2001, one group of Ameriquist brothers filing class action lawing against the company the fears of many in selling Ameriquist to pay to 15 million in reimbursement. 3 years later, the state of Connecticut charged Ameriquist with violating a state regarding refinancing. The company paid 670 million 552 to sell the charges in 2005. Connecticut announced second secretary insured Ameriquist blaming the problem. New employees who didn't know the rules paid 7.25 million to move on Ronley was not sharpened, say Greenland Robert Yanisia. He spent money he thought it would be helpful. As Ameriquist because country dominate Ermil, at least rich people in America with net north 2 billion. The following year, the magazine estimated a net worth at 3 billion, ranking him 73 on the list. He tied with Yahoo co-founder David Filo. By the second wife died down Arma and owned at 30 billion. Trencry compound in Los Angeles and 615 Acrua in Aspen. Snuggle between two ski resorts, a former charted in 1970s to the later second most expensive in the home countries according to a list complete in 2,000,004 by Founded Magazine. It cost a mail 4,006 million. Through 11 attempts, other server has their chief executive. He remained even the much yet ever gracious, respectful even company mentors. The while he got, the more he spent on quit and from his office in ACC, bland 20-story. Earthquakes on Orange Country, the epicenter of the supply industry. He never ever spoke about the practice, the branch officer requirements. In fact, acted in this company were parent supreme virtue, retaining in a place that ocean which lied about in July 2 million. For instance, Ameriquist Publicity Committee to set the practice. The following years, Ameriquist Chairman Steve Proud testified before Senate Banking Committee. Ameriquist had been invited to testify because many in Washington considered Ameriquist a model supreme lender. One example, after exhausting analytic public records, the Los Angeles Times determined that nearly one in the 92 million pharmacy, and he tended float about the problems and never got employment. A new girly, the gritty of the business, never ever didn't EVILS. One on the other hand, how could he not have now? The company was constantly begging with accusation, investigation, and law charging fraud and deceptive practice, where we were inundated with stories about the conduct of the sales pension, everything from drug use and fraud to left and gang affiliation, says another former executive to the best small cement to have practiced and killed of willful ignorance. In January 2003, has a question about Ameriquist practice were hating up the company trading a mortgage Bertagwin, naming Ed Parker to investigate fraud to be riches. At first, Parker said he was hopeful he would given the authority to the job right. In his first investigation, he helped both Brush, Michigan, after looking at 20 few hundred loan fields and discovered that loan officers, when used, the fraud wasn't solely Ameriquist represent the loans from lenders who had bought them. But Parker says another executive made comments that caused him to think they think really want him to be such saintly. His son decided that he has put it was now brought him to do job. I was brought in a promise cover in Fresson discovery that they would cut a paste information from the borough's statement to another. Several of the implicit employees California branches Parker discovered that stated income letters were being manufactured that mispraise the age of the brewers. A loan application starting abroad was a 44 years old consultant who earned 80 million more. In fact, he borrower was simply for in the Florida range. He will record what he found sent to the magnet, and nothing will happen, he said Turner. Fighting in January in 2007 in the pleasure Parker filing against employment discrimination. He says now my problem was we did not want to know that Amelia defenders say I needed while at the defenders to the Supreme Organization will say after the fact is that the true billions were not lenders on Main Street but investor firms on Wall Street. Wall Street after all was but making the warehouse loans on which the supreme companies depended and buying of the mortgage and securities them. The Wall Street firms in fact were dictating to the king of mortgage they will buy and at what price. They wanted the risky supreme mortgage they could get their hands on because there was mortgage generally the most giant in presentation to the board Washington Mutual Executive. Note that the supreme loans were originally 7 more profitable than prime mortgage because company calls them for such more. WAMU used the word to sell staff a bonus they track a prepayment penalty to the loan, which was something else Wall Street wanted. Wall Street said product guidelines says from an Ameriquist executive, I can say to the customer, here's your name. Wall Street figures our investor all winter to play. They the singer and buy. Don't put any warehouse line that means you can make the loan. The executive claims that they wanted because Wall Street will buy them. Ultimately, the market is driven not by the what's the best for brokers, but by the what products investor can invest in the Ameriquist. By President for the Capital Markets Kenneth Parker told a trade publication in November 2004. John Daurio, the executive who had worked at Amal at Long Beach and then from several other supreme companies requires mating in 2,000,003 with some representative of beer streams. How can you stream your volume? In beer stream bankers asking him, he said, "Towed check. Well, we can do 100% loan value stated income loan." 518 FICO scores slightly that the making loans down payment and do not dine the audio continue to say, "Okay, we say no problem, let's do all this day." And we didn't in massive quintiles. Performance, the most dangerous manifesto of Wall Street demands was something called payment opinion adjusted rate mortgage, or a paid opinion REM, pay option arms, gave consumers the right to choose whatever rate they wanted. They start from very low taster to rate that more resembled a 30 years fixed mortgage. The taster which most people chose was so low that often didn't include all the interest, much less principal, making that additional nuisance. Option arms had reserve trading, so that is broken load balance, say 115% of the original amount. He or she will automatically have to be paying the full rate because the amount due each month could escalate too suddenly and dramatically the prices. Payment shock became unwelcome, but every came on filtering of the option arms. Wall Street lover pay option arms, so Ameriquis, New Century, WaMu, all the big subprime lenders began traffic in them. They were extremely lucrative. WaMu, according in the internal presentation, could make more than few times the profit selling an option arms to Wall Street than pricing cement to loan. The only party was leading of them. In fact, where the customer and the refugee, their dams were so beneficial, according to the summary focus group. Very few people simply walked out in the door and asked an opinion arm. In fact, the summary continued. The most brokers said that pay opinion arms were moderately in never bad concept. They also say things like, "It's already scary to me what's going to happen. In a 5 years, I will feelings independence room." Most customers say feel good, making ability to portion of the principal each month because it seemed to be right things to do. But customer could be pressured to take pay opinion and with right sales pitch. WaMu, for instance, noted that sellers told Borrett that price appraisals will likely overcome any negative amortization. They often harm aid pay opinion arms. In the other words, will not borrow. Participants generally chose an opinion arm because it was recommended to them. The WaMu summary said a Federal Reserve Bank of Atlanta student later correlate financial literally to mortgage delinquents, implying that unsurprised customers were they once most likely to fall for this king of pitch. Later, after everything had come to an end, an Ameriquist loan officer named Christopher Warren, who, like Bob Walker in the Sacramento office, possessed riveting confession online about his years in the mortgage business of his 3 years at Ameriquist, where he said he started hustling. He wrote, "Managers and Helens told me the ins and outs of mortgage fraud, drugs, sex, and money, and more money. My friend and manager handled out crystal medicine two loan officers in a big heap of work lenders, and a typical weapon about give was sprayed at Zikro's top and wiped out. He left, he said, with the personal information of 718 million American customers to a start company called WTL Financial. His new company admitted fake credit scores and stole a bank statement in order to sell 1810 million in the securities backed by his loans. They got away with ease because Wall Street didn't care after posting his confession warrant tied to the country was arrested at the Canadian border with 1 million in Swiss bank certificates and 17 million something in this cowboy's boat. The king one piece on the fall 2 million 10 ACC says the warrant was terminated from egregious act and they it found no research to support his hacking claims. The company also says penalty offered to use warrant as an example of a typical employee. Had Ameriquis been older, that would be bad enough, but it wasn't. Its aggressive practice were copied by supreme competitors across the country because they left didn't. I think Ameriquis was the tester, says Bochill. They spewing, they smile everywhere. Ameriquis was a problem for because they were a large company and every joint was treated to compete with them, says an executive of another large lender. If we denied a loan, we track who Unlimited didn't to the long time was Ameriquis. Every time we reflected to the loan George Fall call up and says, well, Ameriquis is doing this could say because John joined of a breakage doesn't mean you have to follow. But they all jump coffee the bridge, including eventually the biggest lender of them all countrywide. Well, this is the final of the chapter 9 and I continue to chapter 10, the final chapter. Thank you. Chapter 10. The Carnival Barker. Angelo Mosillo had a conflict attitude toward subprime lending. On the one hand, he looked down his nose at the likes of Ameriquist and Roland Amal and didn't want Countrywide or himself to be viewed in the same light. There is a very good, solid supreme business and there is 40 business. He once told investors it's very important that you understand the disciplines that Countrywide has. On the other hand, Mosillo could be to the Countrywide's market share eclipse the supreme companies, and market share remain his exception by the middle of 2003. He has promised investors that Countrywide will get or overall market share in the outmake 30% by 2006 2007. At the time, its share of the mortgage market was a little over 10%. Mozilla would later frame the choice Countrywide facing the shark teams. Americans changed the game. She said to Afraid, if you had said, nope, I'm not going to do this because it's not prudent, you would be had to tell Shenderons, I'm shutting down the company. The really over was never that simple. Mozilla had created a company that had the desire to be just big and would not biggest and the emblem in this DNA taking path of a larger segment of the business wasn't Countrywide style and then sprang to giant steam Countrywide was incredible by internal division that way this conflict player out might have helped influence Countrywide. Future comes every bit has a much Ameriquist uncapable this for supreme leading. By the early 2000s, Angelo Mosillo wasn't remotely the hands-on manager his frequent CNBC appearance would suggest this was by choice. He was subtly with a variety of health issues. He had spinal cord problems, so serious had trouble walking at times, according to one person who knew him well. He had neck surgery, that surgery, and another hip surgery, which when doubly this named person says an acquaintance who hasn't for several years has shocked when he next saw Mosilio. He looked like a old man, he said. David Levy, countries why other Pharaoh wasn't around either, having retired as president and chairman in the early 2 million. He died of nephropathy in 2003. Loeb was some ways the invisible founder, yet had yet he had played a critical role in countries-wide success, access to capital to sell and loans to secondary market, the management at interesting at a credit risk. These were the important but low-profile aspects of the business Lauren focused on. Love the pension hadn't been earthly praiseful. As he got older, his aviator became more erratic. In July in 1,999,000, for instance, the news broke that Lowen had seen the million shares of this country's wide stock, high-ranking executive at publicity. Our companies are never supposed to sell stock without first clearing the sale with a legal department and informing the rest of the management team and the board. Loved when after Love, Mosilio seriously entertained the idea of selling countrywide. There lost a potential serious knowing on this door, and he retired Goldman Sachs to find the best fit. Alone countrywide came the close to selling to a big British bank and to Washington Mutual, but deals fell apart. Even without a sale, there were plenty of executives internally with the ambition and skill to run the company. Mosilio had that attitude was incredible in the culture of the company and was a big part of the reason why Countrywide was always driving out the boys. When after had became one of the big boys for country top executive that be said need the probe template never complete went away. Chief of the executive was Stanford Klumbar, of graduate of California State University, Northridge. No was hired by Countrywide in 1979 after spending the early part of creating as Countrywide auditor culinary at intense bookings, demanded and slow, almost hesitant way of speak that reserved to mask his deep emotion and strong will. In 2995, he became the chief operation officer of Countrywide Home Loans, the primary division that had always accounted for the bank on the Countrywide business. 4 years later, Cullen became the division CEO and joined Countrywide board in 2004. He became president and chief operating officer of the parent company. To employees, he was as much the boss as Mosilio. It was always Angelo and Stanwatt to do this. Recalls and former executive, Cumberland was one who took on the last that lovers had always, Haley making sure that countries wide increment protein worked perfectly. This was no small task. A company that was funding tens of billions of dollars were lost every month. He was the inside goes, the numbers go, the operation goes. Say former analyst in 2 millions, Pine-Warner analyst Gary Gordon wrote a report celebrating countries-wide wonderful discipline. That discipline was very much Curland doing, and he took great pride in it. He later tell people that while he has he was there was never a single insurer. He was right either mortgage organization or Colasi had trouble with funding or the sale of their loans. Countrywide never did. Kirlall also pushing Countrywide of diversity. He want Countrywide to be one of the most admired financial service process service provides in the country, not just a big montage marker. To that end, Countrywide bought a bank 2 million because a bank was irregular, but the officer of the controller the currency. Countrywide itself became calm, a Federal Reserve symbol used to tell people that they under the supervision of the country. Two most important bank regulations was a real estate investor trust or rate that reserve big ace to buy. Starting in the early 1980s, it began to aggregate loans from other lenders and turn them into mortgage-backed securities. It also began to organize its all a mortgage. In the other words, the company was starting to complete the countrywide. The growing conflict Mozilla stayed on the board, has did Lowell exercise stock option and collect the sum of the company's rich device. His son Mark began working there in 1996, and when Mozilla finally left the board after Countrywide bought the bank, it was became he had no choice. He Mac also when a bank regulation don't allow anyone to serve as director on the bank boarding company's boards. When Mozilla stepped down from the board, Inimat forgave Austative in 3.3 million loan and payment him another 3.6 million to cover any takes he made one of his stock option. Taking the money was a Turgus move and to out some right countries by and money we starting to matter too much to Mozilla. In 2 million, he owed 2.8 million shares of countrywide stock, including options, and will take home 6.6 million in compensation, a number that rises to 10.1 million by 2 million one and 23.6 million by 22 million three. Yet wanted more. They are CEOs companies to when the most important things made more than the next guy. Say someone has new game. Moliso was getting caught in the all of that. If it is current studying is countries wide problem, a very different quick executive in the church are produced. All of these loans. His name was David Samblo. He had joined Countrywide in 1985 and became its head for local loan production in 2 million. He was named Chief Operating Officer for the Home Loan Division in 2 million 4. Like Conrad, Symboli gone to the California State University in Orange and had worked private as a accountant for many years. The two men appeared too friendly. They were not highly intelligent, proud men who cared deeply about Countrywide studying and its mere shared goals. About Symbol, a former executive, he blamed Countrywide, but there the similar ending. Symbol was super aggressive. He would attack everything around him that he didn't report to him. But when you call him out, it ever growing this aspect of symbol characters gave rise to the internal nickname. Teflon David, another former executive who was fan of symbol, says he loved the details. He loves knowing the details, and he loved putting people through the winter to see if they knew the details. People also made fun of his dictionary natural. Other executive were present they were sampled and say to each other, "You don't understand, you're not capable of understanding. I see all of the colors of the rainbow." Inside, countrywide, it was apparent that a symbol was all out. He was the same of everything that he hadn't personality created. And while firm executives said that Symbol did care about risk, about all Symbol wanted to win. There was clearly mentally from his organization that these guys are occupying us. We've got to do this. We just lost another law, recalls a former executive soon after taking chair the sales foreign symbol material several chains aimed at putting controls wide. The most important of these was the computer system. Instead of taking home at salary, laws officer, wall, and commissioner says, but friction can become cancerous. For countries now, the friction started to become insignificant in 2004 when the Federal Reserve began to raise interest rates. Normally, rate increases single that it's time for mortgage organizations to pull back on the loan production. But in this new world, loan production did not reclaim. Those like Curland, who worried that higher rates brought increased risks of the default, well although they were trying to hold back a flow in later moments. They began to joke that they were became the CNOs. The chief Caroline complained to conflicts that one some days he feels her role was incredibly who are prominent already in many cases in corporate America and the guys who say yes to an idea that worker. He later told a friend, the guys who say not big fuller, there's not list for that. That why end up with bubbles. When countries wide had the first movement into subprime lending back in the late 1990s, Kerlen and Mosilio had a blunt belief that the market was moving toward risk-based pricing, and the lines between prime and subprime were going to away. And they convinced themselves that countries will establish standards that will keep the true troubling borrowers away, while capturing the more credit-only subprime borrowers, those who were just still below prime. In Italy, the company was very careful. Curland inserted their three rules for subprime lending at countrywide, according to several firm executives. First, all the subprime loans had to be sold, by which he meant entered things included the residuals that most subprime companies held their books. Second, the borrowers had to either make a 20% down payment or mortgage insurance covered that the first 20% of the loan. Finally, countrywide called after any subprime loans products that had higher probability of default than an FHA or VA loan. These rules, however, seemed to constrain the company less and less. At the time when and whatever reservation Mosilio had about subprime lending seemed to fade bigger the market within countries, called after omission in 118 different products. In 2 million for the American banker accusing Mosilio of sounding like a carnival barker. Has a listened some of them. We have an arms, 1 year's arms, 3 years, 5 years, 7 and 10 years. We have entirely only lows, pay option lows, zero downs program, low or not dog programs, fast and steep programs, and subprime lends. Symbol told investors that it's our intent to carry every product or program which there is reasonable demand. Your custom can legitimately for loan anywhere else in the US. They quality and country at countries wide in the completely the SEC later flicks Mozilla symbol and former CFO Eric Slam the agency alleged that countries wide referred to his to as his marching trembling. Besides, Will was strict willing to avoid anything mortgage insured willing to writing anything and estimates about the probability of default open opposures. Formula rules could be relevant basically Magan Inite and former executive says that if he called back and do think do differently would other subprime companies, for instance, adopted the loan strategy retail, and different retails, not just adjusted. These were risks never met to consist and binding the rating, increasing the chance of defaults. Yet, science country competitors were making risk loans countries wide made them too. It was made in subprime was just really high rates from the borrowers with bad credit, says Josh Rasner. When you are biggest, you have a responsibility to not give credible to bad products, where your countries wide finding Freddie or any of the big mortgage lender outs that were doing his, say a former countrywide executive. Countrywide did just of upside they make mean the product of competitors, no matter how dangerous it gave them an impressure he didn't reserve. There was a final problem with the company subprime guidelines. If a borrower could meet guidelines, countries wide would remake to long work anyway. This was not some from aggressive branch managers to sidestep the rules. It was the rule countries wide called it exception processing tree system. Every lender had some version of this, but according to the SEC, countries-wide laboratory used its exception policy for loans that didn't into even the loans guidelines. One former countries-wide executive says that Mozilla that sale forcing to listen to symbol. North Carolina is complying the SEC corroborates that in a part saving the company rules about kin subprime loans now has an 18 and 20 in customer order were ignored by the production division in 2,000,005. John McMurray, a countries-wide chair risk officer, wrote in a mail to symbol has a consequence of countries-wide strategy to have within products line in the industry where are clearly out on the pointer in many areas. The founding McMurray added had accepted the fall rates and losses. Thus, in the industry should she case even if Mozilla still refused accounting it, save for industry executive Roland Armstrong. He Angelo was a hypocrite. It was something countries-wide acting to down countries-wide was in the same game. But to the outside world the picture couldn't have seemed more glorious. By the end of 2004, countries-wide had leaped in front of Wells Fargo to the nation's largest mortgage company in the originate estimated $363 billion in mortgage that year. A year later, countries-wide organized almost $500 billion in the mortgage. Sambol and other executives had taken to telling investors that countries-wide accepted to organize $1 trillion want in the mortgage by 2010. They were ably there. It was pointless to accept Washington to do anything to stop a business that charity subprime to. In addition to Ned Greenwich, the only people in Washington who seemed to care about ensured that Senator Paul Savares in Celia Baer, the Assistant Secretary of the Treasury for the financial institution during the first few years of the Bush administration, but as a Democratic senator, Savares had left in. The problem, say one foreign regulation, is that they were all making too much money. So it was left to local officials to try and stop abuses, and try they did. But at every leap, those who looked on the lending machine found themselves systemed by lender lobbying in the federal bank regulation, whose activity and successful saw the hard local official. It would be hard to imagine a more chilling example of how national bank regulation had become captive to the structure they were changing with regulating. Take Cleveland, which had it hard by the first subprime bubble and fearing the consequence of the second bubble. In 2001, the city council passed a law banning balloon payments and magazine bond. A court ruled in a favor of the EFSEA in 2003. Cleveland was overturned. The same story played out on Oakland, Los Angeles, and elsewhere countries tried to extinguish the state laws. The EFSA doubled this municipal legislation program almost without biblis the APSA. 2,006,000 Americans is executive than suppose and business associates donate at the last 20.5 million to state and federal political groups, according to the Wall Street Journal. A state that wanted to do something about subprime lending did farmers much better. In the fall 2002, Georgia Governor Ross Vane, a Democrat, which probably loans from being made without regent of the borough's ability to repay it so probably liability. Their oak tree and its instantaneous Mozilio called the new law in Europe. Americans say class action risk. The rating agencies jumped in the onside of the bankers with S&P and Moody's, but saying they will no longer rate bonds backed by loans that were organized in Georgia. But the most crushing blow came from the National Regulation Specialty, the Office of this Supervision, and the OCC, which overturned rules 2 years of the assents in national banks, saying what that meant is in effect was instructions that were regulated by the OTS or the OCC, were insumed from state or local laws. In theory, preemption makes sense in companies always want to able to play by the one set of the rules instead of the having to adapt to different like 50 different states federal preemption. Preemption also became recruiting tool of the regulation training to expand their own empire is incredible. American financial institutions have the ability under certain circumstances to switch regulation, an idea that had been promoted by Alan Greenspan. His second defile was that having multiple overplaying regulation was not for the system because has the ones put in the testimony before and Senate Banking Committee. It served as valuable restraint and any one regulation conducting inflexive. The inflex rehire police, the present structure had hidden probes. Jerry Hamlin, the controller of the currency, took that idea a step further rather than sit back and wait for the institution to come into OCC. He at length taken up the task of being regulating ban agency in early 2002. For instance, the COCC ensured a press release with the striking headline "Controller Cost Presidential and Major Advantages of the National Bank Charter." A FNAMA regulation says that view his job as salesman for the national chapter, he would make sales calls. The OCC used prevention it was investing. Just about a year after the OCC first began troubling the virtues through prevention, the OTS joined in accounting that first it outward were examples from the Cape province of Georgia. Newlands, the OTC move helped make the state more early will have on the playing field. The OTC had long ascending prevention when state passed laws that it didn't think its reps should have to follow, but in early 2004 the OCC went all in declaring that the institution under its watch would be spared from all state and local laws aimed at predatory lending. After Carnival moved its mortgage company to in this federal charter bank in order to take advantage of the OCC preemption policy. The state of Michigan agreed the should still be able to regulate Wachovia's local lending unit. Wachovia unit, the OCC filed supporting bribe. The thing went all the way of the Supreme Court, which in 2007 sided in a Wachovia, and so went New Jersey, which passed predatory lending law in the fall of 2003, replaying in a year later after the lending community along with the rating agencies following the Georgia playbook. In New York, the OCC arrested prevention to a when Attorney General Elliot Steiner. I think the reality is that refusals to permit out inquiry in the assistance of the OCC in helping the bank shop stop it was symbolic of the war where nobody wanted to look at anything, Strip later said. John Dugan, who represented the Hawkeye in 2004, has controller of the currency world later agreed the national banks were only a small part of the problem. He wasn't completely wrong by the OCC calculation. National banks organized to 12.1% of non-prime loans between 2,500,000 and 2,700,000. But his argument missing the largest point: prevention created competition between the OCC and the OTS. And the OTS, which regular institutions like INDIMAC in WAMU, was indisputably a worker regulation. Secondly, preemption means that even that straight charter lenders didn't have to curb their abuse comes states were requested to pass enforce strict rules from the institution that federally regulated institutions were allowed to do. Says Kevin Stein, the associate director of the California Ravens Coalition Bank, said, "We don't have complete." The OCC says they don't have company. The state legislature say, "If we can pass a law that regular federally chartered banks operating in our state were." Finally, subprime loans continue to make their way honestly into the national banking system. Banks to securitization, it really didn't matter. Organize them. States high not way of coding of that all important funding source and national regulators with their energy focused on making sure that their institutions were free from pesky state laws, in least thought by the potential impact of mortgage funds on official institutes and stock makers It will only placing financial institutions at risk and have adverse effect on the stock market. Investors may lose find and require higher returns for mortgage-backed securities, and still the regulation remained uncurtailed. There was simply effort and enact a national law to curb some of the subprime lending abuses. But while some lenders, including Ameriquist and New Country, didn't want national legislation to avoid the constant, the powerful Mortgage Bankers Association didn't put this way begging a law. One former Lovely says that the deciding factor was Angelo Mosilio, who told him no regulation. According to the Wall Street Journal, countries wide spent 8.7 million between 2 million 2 and 2 million 6, and political donation campaign contribution has soon as some starts to cheat to get market share, and their market share gets bigger. Well, guys are gonna chase to keep and get market shares. That's why you have old school rules, but shit happens if you let two curves down. For the few remember Toll War, mortgage and the concept of risks, choose small David Sainting and fashioning mortgage Barker with Homson, Arizona Basin primary residential with makes in baking in 1988 when he was 18. As he's watched the growing instances says he went from feeling scared to live a sea out to taking. What good am I? In 2005, Satan began to dip his toe into the Supreme Market law. He inside out takes controls. Every Supreme lot that was offered that branch was underwritten again at headquarters. He still remembers the day in June 2005 he got a call from Hulasser, who brought his company. They say, Dave, what's going on? Your company sells the lowest amount approved loans of anyone who do business with. Stringent requests because citizens use this company software they could see their system was approving loans that sitting was then resented at earthquakes. Oh, it's simple. Sitting told them we check a credit corporate and not allowed growth. That was we have flew you out. One of the sweet responses we don't like that you need the trust our system, and if you do your volume will up by leaves around of bounds. Why don't to Browen will pay? System asked. You don't need to worry about the responses. The next day Sadin say he got trips straight to for the supply loans he's selling, which showed his various periods were willing to pay. Juni had been in usually of the after was close to what Werner. It was a moment when a supreme marker was simply up, almost his bubble was coming to an end. Although at the moment didn't last very long, it was enough for sitting. Dave and the man say, I like you get out. Excuse me? Sitting replying, he thought to himself, just came from the meeting where people were telling me not to turn down loans. The men say, if you ever say I say this, I didn't it, but if you want the company to around, you will not find other supreme loan there is going to be able. And so Sitting said he called an emerging boss meeting and he shut down his teeny supreme business even about his firm had just spent 400 millions buying some necessary software. All my friends in the business were loaning all the way to the bank. He says over the next 2 years he watches his business pay pals make millions and buy private jets and mansions. He remembers things to himself. What the crap? well, this is the final of this part of the all the evils are there, and thank you.